interacting with the metaverse, we're in a place where most people are trying to sell you something, not show you something. They aren't showing you anything. They aren't really building anything. So for us, it was very important to, okay, we need to try to fill that gap. We need to try to be building something and think about what is it that needs to be built. And I think the weird thing with the metaverse is that, in a way, the metaverse needs to be a state of mind.
Okay, wonderful. So this is Ultrasync, and I got Nils Pihl here with me. Super excited to have you here in one of the first kind of new format episodes for Ultrasync. And you are really doing some crazy next level stuff. I'm really, really excited to find out more about it and just kind of dig deep into what it is that you're doing with Auki Labs, with Matterless Studios, but more generally speaking, with your disruptive, revolutionary vision that you're bringing to, let's say, the future of, the future of how we navigate reality. Is that the right way to say that? The future of how we connect with reality and navigate reality?
First of all, hi. Thanks for having me here. Super exciting to be on a transhumanist focused podcast. Very excited to be here. The problem that we are trying to solve, if we can go straight off the deep end here, is that in the universe, there is no such thing as absolute coordinates. There is no thing that we can detect with a sensor of where we are. That's not something you can detect with a sensor. So of course, we've had to throw up satellites in the sky, these GPS satellites, to help us figure out roughly where we are on Earth. But on Mars, there are no GPS satellites today. And even if there were GPS satellites on Mars, we exist on completely different maps, right? There's no ultimate position in the world. And that creates some really pesky commercial problems today already. For example, let's say you want to do a shared AR experience, right? I want to put an AR fairy right here. And I want it to be visible on my device, but I also want it to be visible on your device. That's not possible today, or it's very difficult to do today, because the devices, a device like this one, only has GPS to figure out where it is, right? And GPS doesn't work indoors, because as helpful as these satellites are, they require line of sight. So they're never going to work indoors. So we find ourselves in a weird situation where if we want to imagine a world where there's like a persistent AR layer on top of the world and people are wearing AR glasses, the GPS has to be replaced.
Right. And that's something that Auki Labs proposes to do. This is a bit of a spoiler. We're going to get into that later and try to see what it is that you guys have actually developed, that your team has developed, and how that contributes to, providing a solution to spatial computing and a whole host of other applications, and potentially even change humanity, change how we as a species, how we as a civilization interact with each other. But we're going to get to that later. Let's start with, after you have given us this beautiful kind of introduction and preamble into what you're working on right now. Let's start with yourself first. Like, who's Nils Pihl? What brings you to do this right now? What are kind of your formative influences? Can you tell us a little bit about that kind of background?
Sure. So I was born in '86. My parents were software entrepreneurs. So I had a computer in my room very early. I think I was like 5 years old when I first had a computer in my room. And that inevitably led to me being quite early on the internet and being quite young on the internet. And I ended up spending most of my time on the internet, while reading everything from hard sci-fi to, of course, Snow Crash, right? And I adopted this idea that, I'm a transhumanist. I can be my digital identity. I don't have to identify with this body. I can identify with who I am in this chat room. And sure, like, chat rooms are not these exciting, immersive 3D spaces that people are talking about now, but they were still social spaces. They were still places where we lived out our lives. And I spent so much of my time there that, by the time I was 14, my brain was rewired. So I was thinking in English instead of my native Swedish, because I lived online, right? So metaverse as a concept is something I've thought about for a long time. And AR as a form factor, even though I only got sucked into it, a few years ago professionally, I find AR very interesting because I believe it is the natural technological progression of human language. In fact, I want to argue that language was the first augmented reality technology. What do I mean by that? All right, so let's imagine, Vijay, that we're walking through a forest, right? And we come across this fallen tree. And I tell you, hey, look at that lovely couch. The moment I've said that, you actually perceive this tree differently, right? You now see the sittingness of the tree. And I have augmented your reality, right? By applying this informational layer on what you see. And I believe that this impulse, the impulse of language, is the impulse towards augmented reality. I think augmented reality is our language. It's a natural, deep human impulse. And as someone who's worked with behavior for a long time, because that's been most of my career, is working with behavioral modeling, these kinds of things. It seems like this is why AR is important, but also it helps me see, from a behavioral point of view, why is AR stuck today? Like, why is it not good? And the reason why it's not good has to do with this concept of reality, right? What is reality? Here's a very simple definition. Reality is that which is intersubjective. What does intersubjective mean? It's the things that I perceive it subjectively, but you also perceive it subjectively, right? We both saw it. And the fact that we both saw it is kind of what makes it real. And if you hear a sound and I didn't hear it, that makes you feel uncomfortable, right? If we see a beautiful woman and you say, wow, she's beautiful, and I say, I don't think so, that's uncomfortable, right? If one of us laughs at a joke and the other one doesn't get it, it's uncomfortable. We want to have intersubjectivity. Intersubjectivity is like what grounds us in reality, and it's the difference between feeling like you have a psychosis, right? Like when we leave intersubjectivity, things get unpleasant quickly. And AR today is not intersubjective. AR today, because you cannot have precise positioning, we see the things in different places, right? And that just does not feel good. Right, and also you can't share it, right? You can't show anyone else what you're seeing without looking crazy, right? Because the other person won't see what you see.
Yeah, so AR is kind of in a state of, like, to use a philosophical term, like solipsism, where the world only exists for that person, yes, but they're not sharing their world with anybody else.
Yeah.
But yeah, I love the kind of the references and the way of thinking that you put behind what you're creating, and giving it that kind of bigger context, as opposed to just saying, like, look, okay, here's a, as some people would, like in a startup world, it would be like, okay, here's a problem, we have solved it. But then there's no understanding of, or no further reflection on why that matters in the big picture, and how that kind of can impact, can have a wider impact. But your reflections are really strong on that. And I would really, I really enjoyed reading your black paper, the Aukiverse black paper. It's on the metaverse, which we can talk about like in a bit. But I'd really recommend everybody to go read that black paper, because it's so deep and so interesting. And it's okay if you haven't yet thought about the importance of spatial computing and of what could be wrong with this overhyped buzz around the metaverse currently, then that can be a really big wake-up call for you, or it can be a really kind of an eye-opener for you. And so let's talk about that a little bit. Like, the metaverse is obviously a term that's super hyped right now. And what do you see as potentially missing there, or something that's not properly fully thought through, which is always the case, obviously, when we have a hype or a buzz around the concept, then lots of people jump onto it, many of whom haven't properly thought things through. So where do you think or is the space there for, or the necessity there for a correction or for something to change or to be added, which Auki Labs is doing. What do you think about the metaverse?
I think that the current conversation around the metaverse is very much born out of frustration with our current economic system more than an ambition towards like some exciting transhumanist future. And I think that's why you see so many new metaverse projects being very focused on the monetization aspects of these places. They build NFT marketplaces before they have any game or world or anything. They sell a token before they've really built anything. And I think that shows that right now, as a society interacting with the metaverse, we're in a place where most people are trying to sell you something, not show you something. They aren't showing you anything. They aren't really building anything. So for us, it was very important to, okay, we need to try to fill that gap. We need to try to be building something and think about what is it that needs to be built. And I think the weird thing with the metaverse is that in a way, the metaverse needs to be a state of mind. It needs to be something that the end user is doing mentally, right? If we say that we are living on the internet, that's a state of mind. We need to create the kind of immersion where you don't feel like, oh, I am sitting here with a headset, right? Or, oh, I am temporarily diving in this world. And that's why I think even the concept of augmented reality is so much more powerful than virtual reality, because augmented reality allows us to build on, the already powerful emotional context and things around us. But it also doesn't lift us, wholeheartedly out of the world we're in to put us in a new one. So I think the metaverse conversation needs to go much more into the showing than the selling. And I think we need to realize that the thing that we need to show people is that there's a different way to engage with each other and to communicate with each other.
So hold on, there's two things there. The first one is that in the metaverse hype that's going on, a lot of people are basically, selling promises instead of building actual kind of realities with use value for people. And the second thing that you mentioned is that kind of, where is the metaverse, right? Is it, and the conception that a lot of people have is that we're talking about virtual worlds like, Decentraland or Sandbox or whatever, or all the other new ones that are out there that are more, or Fortnite even, and so on, like that are basically virtual worlds that I need to plug into. And in order to plug into, I need to plug out of this reality. But you're talking about augmented reality as a layer on top of our current reality, and you're putting that forward as the metaverse or the future of the metaverse. That's quite different, though. And obviously, there's no consensus on what the metaverse is really. So, but you're putting this forward as an. Can you talk more about that? Like, how are you positioning that? Like, how are you seeing that as part of that same conversation? Even, is it so clear to everybody that it's the same conversation?
I think, after this little market bubble is over, the noise will die out automatically, and what will be left are the people with something to really say and show. So my co-founder in Matterless, he has this great line that transformative technology requires transformative narratives. Right? Like when you're building something that is really radically new and enables like new modalities, you also need a narrative to help people understand what it is they're doing. I don't think that's what's missing for people to, embrace their digital identities, is that they can, spend Bitcoin in a 3D game. I don't think that's what's missing. What's missing is building tools that allow for people to arrive at great intersubjective experiences. And in a way, because capitalism has its hooks so deeply in the construction of the metaverse today, so much of what's being built is about this, really radical self-expression, which is cool on the one hand, but also done in a way that's kind of like shouting out a window, because you're not making sure that you're creating experiences that actually connect people so that that self-expression becomes meaningful.
Right. Yeah, there's a lot of kind of, I mean, in my mind, we need to always be vigilant and critical, and at the same time super enthusiastic and super like, embracing of technology. But that's kind of this we need to kind of be both at the same time, right? Not be stupid and just buy into everything that comes, like, because all these technologies obviously come with dangers and pitfalls and things that are not, that could go in the wrong direction, right? So and then you mentioned some right now where in this hype around the metaverse, the NFT space as well, like not everything that happens in there is good. Some stuff is patently stupid. You're like, okay, what's the point of this? Like, like does this advance humanity right now? That you can, whatever that you can, obviously, there's collector value around stuff and so on and so forth, but also, maybe it's not necessarily for our benefit to create artificial scarcity everywhere, right? Like I was under the impression that abundance is what we want, right? Why is it good that we're creating scarcity everywhere? But that's maybe another conversation.
I have a theory of why this is happening now in human history. And I think, we can look at basic human needs as falling in a couple of categories. We have a basic need for housing. Absolutely. We have a basic need for food. Absolutely. We have a basic need for education, but there's a basic need that's interesting to talk about, which is the need of value storage over time, right? Because, we take us back to the Stone Age. We're producing, we're getting things out of nature, things that perish, right? And we're looking for ways to make sure that our labor doesn't wither away over time. Right. So we have this deep need for value storage. And historically, up until this point in history, value storage has been owned by like two actors, real estate and banks. Right. That's where value storage has been. For most consumers, if you think of their consumer spending, some of it's going to go to housing, some of it's going to go to food, some of it, like the part of spending of like your economic output that has been captured by the value storage has gone to very, very few actors. And now all of a sudden, because confidence in these actors are lower, but also because technology has allowed this to open up, there's a radical shift in how like civilization is deploying itself economically. So a part of the metaverse industry is actually, just, hey, we're trying to create assets industry, because assets is a foundational human need, but it's not the human need that I'm interested in solving.
Right. Okay. So, obviously, yeah, we're creating this additional world, and there's going to be vast amount of new assets in there, and people are staking already kind of their claims to it, and they're buying it, and they want to be first, and so on. And there's FOMO, and we can see all of that happening already. But so what you're interested in, if I can just paraphrase that or rephrase that, is you want to create a technology or like the conditions for how we can actually enhance human interactions and human, maybe a human machine or human object interactions in the real world, right?
I want to create richer human communication. Right. Just like the internet keeps getting faster, bandwidth keeps increasing. Human communication wants to increase in bandwidth, right? And augmented reality is how we will increase this bandwidth. And to me, that's the path of transhumanism. It's not about getting robot eyeballs and legs and stuff like this. It's about using our culture to make better minds, right? To create a culture that allows us to live more fulfilling lives.
So look, before we get into the transhumanism question and how you think AR contributes to that, or spatial computing, for the benefit of our listeners and viewers, let's restate a little bit more about like where you are in that field, like where your venture and your work and your thinking is doing, like the is kind of doing the intervention there in that field. And so, I mean, I didn't mention it in the beginning, but I mean, you're not just here speaking from a theoretical perspective. Like your company, Auki Labs, has produced some, very kind of disruptive next level solution to a real problem. You guys, I think you just raised $13 million. Is that right?
That's right. Auki
right,
Labs
yeah.
raised $13 million, and our daughter company, who's making experiences using this technology, have also raised 7 million. So we are deploying $20 million right now towards bringing augmented reality into the human consciousness.
Congratulations. So is that your Series A?
That's our seed round.
That's your seed round. Nice. Okay.
Yeah,
we're
very
that's
happy.
The first raise you had.
Yes.
Okay, beautiful. No, that's great. So and what you've developed with Auki Labs, I believe. Actually, let me. You put it so nice there. You said the world's first multi-peer continuous calibration system with probabilistic consensus algorithms to allow for passive and continuous positioning in the metaverse. Now, that sounds like a mouthful, but let's see.
Let's unpack it.
Yeah, what is it? What is it?
All right. So, because as I said in the beginning of this conversation, right, there's no position that we can just tap into. We have to create position. All positions in the universe are relative to something. And if you embrace that thought, you realize that, okay, actually, we need to just build from first principles a peer-to-peer positioning system. Because when we go to Mars or when we land on another planet somewhere, right, there will be no satellites hanging in the sky for us to position ourselves. The moment we set foot on that new planet, we're lost, right? So we need to have a positioning system. There is nothing that nature provides. We have to have a positioning system that can be bootstrapped and that works fine-grained enough so that we can do all of the cool things that we want to be able to do, like have shared AR experiences. Or here's another, crazy reason for why we need something better than GPS. Let's put some numbers on this, right? I lived in Beijing for 7 years. Beijing has a population of over 20 million people, and the average commute in Beijing is 2 hours. And the reason for this is because there's a lot of traffic jams. Now, how will we solve this? Well, of course, people say it'll be solved with self-driving cars. Duh, of course. But actually, if a self-driving car cannot express its position to another car precisely, then they cannot coordinate with each other in any kind of efficient way at all to make sure that they don't get into collisions, right? So if we want high-speed self-driving cars that don't even need red lights, then these self-driving cars need to be able to communicate their position at least at the centimeter level.
And even more so for drones and flying vehicles and so on and so forth, which also move in other directions other than just kind of on the flat plane, right?
So let's put this in perspective, because the human mind is not good about thinking of millions, right? But what does it mean to have 20 million people? Of course, not all of them are driving, but if you look at the amount of hours stuck in traffic every day, right? You get 20 million hours a day lost in traffic. How much is 20 million hours? Well, that's on the order of magnitude of how long it took to build the pyramids, right? That's how much human productivity is lost in traffic jams in Beijing today, right? So not having precise positioning is an enormous drain on human productivity. Not just, a barrier to how we can communicate with each other efficiently, but it's an enormous drain on human productivity that our machines cannot communicate precisely about where they are.
Right. So the just to put that out there again for people who are listening, the legacy technology that you guys are looking to disrupt is GPS, obviously. So in GPS is
GPS and Wi-Fi triangulation and other solutions like this. There are alternatives to GPS, of course, right? The point is, everyone, there are a couple of small companies you may have heard of, Apple, Google, Microsoft, Facebook, Snapchat. All of these big companies are trying to build new positioning systems that will allow them to have AR. And most of them, all of them actually, are focused on doing what's called a digital twin. Right? Which is the idea that we will use cameras and LiDARs to map out the world and create a one-to-one replica of the world in 3D that we can then use to look through our cameras and, cross-reference a global memory of what the world looks like and then figure out where we are. And in a way, that's kind of intuitive, because that's how we navigate. We look around in the world to find where we are. But actually, all we need, again, is to know where we are relative to each other. Because we are the ones trying to solve problems. Does that
When
make
you're
sense?
saying relative to each other, yeah, I mean the insight itself is obviously brilliant, and you would think actually, would be intuitive too, because we know obviously that there is no absolute coordinates in the universe, at least since relativity theory, and since the in the Newtonian universe, you're thinking that you have like these coordinates and they're just there somehow in the background, but then now we understand that that's not the case. Though the universe doesn't even have a center point or something. Like any point could be, it's perspectival, right? Like any point can be the center, right? And
Yeah.
and that's like obviously on a small scale for us, also applies for us too, like on Earth, how we're communicating and connecting with each other. But so you're saying that the existing approach to this, or the ones that the big players are following, is to create a digital twin, right? To map everything basically, right? And then to use visual computing to detect basically an object, and then to say, okay, this object is this in my map, right? To kind of correlate match the object that you see with what you have in your digital map, right? Your digital twin map.
Yeah, that's what they're trying to do. Okay. So they've purchased almost every company that moves over the last 3 years that are building anything related to be able to do a 3D mapping of something. So it's very clear that they're pulling in that direction. But I have a couple of concerns with that approach. One is, how badly do you want Facebook to have a scan of your bedroom?
Right. So your concern, that concern being that, does that digital map extend to the inside of our homes?
Well, if it doesn't, right, I can't position myself in my home, right? Are we solving positioning or not?
Well, I mean, if I have several assistants around me that if I mention them by name, they will just start to interrupt my podcast right now, so, but they're already in my home, in some ways, right? So, I see that concern. Obviously, I'm very strong on privacy and Web3 and so on and so forth as well. But I also see how the counter tendency could be like, hey, that's just what it is. It's just going to happen. Like we're going to map everything, including even your genome and your inside your body. Even we're going to map everything. I mean,
right? But we
somebody
can give a more
in Silicon Valley, California, now has my DNA data, and they're just mapping that right now with millions of other people.
It's
right?
nuts, right?
Right. So I mean, it's like, how much deeper than that can you get? Is that I understand that concern, but is that something that will be a hindrance to this approach, really?
Maybe not. Like maybe people will be happy, to accept the most extreme form of cookies. Maybe, right? But I also think that if we can give people an alternative that, not only is viable, but in many ways has, benefits over the other approach, humanity might go down that path instead, and stop this trend of extreme centralization.
Yeah, no, obviously like surveillance is a problem, is a big problem that we need to think about. But I don't know the solution. Like, how can we, because at the same time we do want more data and we do want more understanding and mapping, right? But we also don't want like the complete loss of privacy and like the absolute and total surveillance and so on, right? Like
let me paint you a picture of what it is we are building in relation to digital twin, because we're not sitting idly by in the digital twin era, even though I don't believe that's the final destination. But we're building out this system that we could describe as decentralized interoperable domains. Means nothing. Let's unpack it, right? A domain is your set of digital maps that you have gotten either through scanning your space or uploading a file, or however you got in possession of these maps. These are your maps. And the domain is also your economic ownership of this place. Your ability to add more data to it, add more features to your map, the ability to remove features from the map, but also the right to invite or disinvite participants from reading this map. And this map can be self-hosted on your computer should you so choose, right? Now, because you have this map, I want you to imagine that you have a warehouse and I have a warehouse where we're both industry men. And we want a drone to deliver a package from your warehouse to mine, right? The future that we envision is that this drone navigates by rough features, maybe even GPS, to the main vicinity of your domain, where it connects to your domain and negotiates with you about how much information it needs to solve the task. So maybe you opt to give the whole map to the drone, no questions asked, right? Maybe you give a select part of the map, or maybe you are quite privacy preserving and you will only give it a path that it must follow. And if it does not follow this, it gets penalized because everyone has tokens staked into a reputation that they will play nice in this information sharing game. Right?
Interesting. Yeah. So you basically have the Web3 solution to the problem of mapping and sharing spatial
decentralized,
data.
interoperable domains.
Right.
So our domains can exchange data with each other, should we want to. Do we feel an economic incentive to do so? But no one needs to have a whole map of the whole world. Instead, you are the master of your domain, and you map it out as rich as you would like it. And that means also people can be commercial domain owners. Like maybe you're a mall, and you want to make sure that your domain is so well mapped that when people bring their AR apps in there, the AR beings automatically know where all the walls are and all the doors are, and they have all this semantic understanding, right? This is what we're building.
Right. And that's also already explains part of why I would say you chose to build this technology or kind of execute this together with a Web3 ecosystem with tokens and a whole kind of idea around like token exchanges there and so on and so forth. Like you didn't build this in a, there could have been the core technology seems to be is phones or devices communicating with each other, right?
Yeah, but also robots that want to navigate a place together, self-driving cars that want to navigate the streets together. It's really just a protocol for machines to share informational data with each other and to collaboratively contribute to domains that they need to navigate.
Right. So kind of a machine-to-machine protocol for positioning, for
it's
kind of
a collaborative OS, if you will,
intersubjective or interobjective positioning. Right. Okay. No, that's great. So yeah, look, let's before we get fall into the go really into that Web3 rabbit hole, which is so much that we could talk about, but I would like to steer back the conversation now to the the word that you've mentioned a few times and that we as Ultrasync that I'm extremely interested in, and that's the the human technology merger and synthesis and coevolution. That's also known as transhumanism. Like how do we in the coming decades, not in some kind of distant future that's so far out of reach, but actually in the coming time now in this decade, a lot of this will start to happen, right? When exponential technologies start to come out and start to change who we are. How do we use these technologies to create a new human or the next level of the human, right? And how, or actually that which comes after the human, which in any, by any kind of proper, reasonable assessment, you look at it, it's not anymore, doesn't make sense to call it human anymore. It's got to be something beyond that, right? And we're approaching that. We're approaching that quite rapidly. How do you see the role of AR and spatial computing and this kind of mapping and positioning as contributing to the change of what humanity is?
I believe that once we can create intersubjective digital experience in the real world, and we can use this to communicate with each other, something quite interesting happens. Like why is Matterless, our daughter company, called Matterless? Well, because we were looking for a word to describe something that is quite different from AR. It's intersubjective AR. What is that? Well, if you imagine that there was, on the table behind me there, an AR dragon or whatever, and we could both see it there. If I keep looking at it, doesn't matter if it's through a phone or a pair of glasses, whatever, if I keep looking at it, when you stop looking at it, it still feels real to you because it's precisely positioned right there. And the fact that it has an intersubjective quality of position means that it becomes real in a way that augmented reality isn't otherwise, right? So, we wanted to have a word for things that were matterless, but real, right? It's a thing. It's a thing because it has an intersubjective location. We can all experience it. So it has thingness, right? It has place, right? And when we realize that other things can have position, right? I think that helps us also think about ourselves differently. Like one of the things that I really, well, actually, when we improve our language, it helps us think about ourselves differently. One of the things that I'm like very red pilled about is the importance of memetics, right? Meme theory. Meme theory is the lens that I view the whole world through. I don't
talk
care.
a little bit more about that, like.
Absolutely. Are you familiar with natural selection?
Yeah, of course.
Right? So in 1976 or 79, I forget, this biologist Richard Dawkins wrote a book called The Selfish Gene, where he wanted to explain in popular science, like to the layman, what the neo-Darwinian synthesis is.
Right.
And the neo-Darwinian synthesis is a lot of big words, but it's a very simple concept. Natural selection does not happen at the level of the species or the tribe or even the individual. It happens at the level of the gene. When we look at the gene first, we can make the most powerful predictions about how evolution will progress, right? And explanatory models for why things have played out the way they have. And in one of the chapters of this book, Richard Dawkins had a thought experiment. He asked, what if culture and behavior was subject to natural selection as well? Could we create some kind of theoretical gene analog for information?
Right.
And he coined the word meme to mean a piece of behavior or culture that can be transmitted from one person to another. So a meme is everything from the shape of headphones, this is a behavior that can be copied, to the word itself, right? All of these things are memes. And natural selection, right, is the idea that it's survival of the fittest. Fittest meaning that which reproduces most. So survival of the fittest for memes is the same thing. Those things that reproduce most, right? And the meme is, in a way, the first ever replicator. Not DNA, the meme. I would argue, maybe this is historically inaccurate, but philosophically accurate. We'll get into it, right? That at the highest level, a meme is a piece of information that is looking to replicate itself. It manages to replicate itself. We don't have to talk about looking because that implies agency, right? But it's copying itself. And a gene is also a piece of information that copies itself, but with a physical instantiation. Now, with the invention of language, something very interesting happens to the human, right? Humans start becoming programmed by their culture and their language, and we become genetic and mimetic hybrids. I am not just this body. I am also the language that I use, the expressions that I know, the history that I share with other people. This is also a big part of my identity. And one of the things that I really believe is that we are fast approaching the era when the meme itself starts understanding that it exists. Because in the 70s, Dawkins wrote this book, right? And now we're starting to look at, the human brains are starting to look at, how can we make things better? How can we create better culture, right? So for the last 15 years, I've tried to embody being a mimetic engineer. I've professionally been a mimetic engineer with the idea that we can go into a post-genetic identity and focus much more on what is the knowledge that we have produced? What is the information that we contain? Try to embrace the identity of not being a genetic being, but a mimetic being, right?
The concept of the meme is certainly strong. kind of fruitful concept. I'm in general not a big fan of Richard Dawkins and that kind of
Yeah, not everyone
approach
is. Yeah.
with a bit with reductionist kind of
Hmm.
approach. When there's I think there's more to life and there's to consciousness as well,
For
especially
sure.
than just kind of blind process of natural selection. Obviously, natural selection underlies everything. I'm not denying that. Obviously, it underlies everything, but still there's more. There's like other factors. There's other levels and layers of consciousness and patterns connecting with each other and so on. But the concept. I mean, meme also you could say talk of an idea or archetype or right like. I
Hmm.
mean, depending on from which tradition you come from, and
Absolutely. Yeah.
and you're saying that these memes or these ideas or these kind of like cultural forms, right? Forms of culture, we could say,
Hmm.
right? That they are like it's there. Your focus is very much on them, like how they evolve and how they develop. So now just bring that back to the AR and spatial computing question. Where do you see that technology or this kind of layer that we're building, this augmented layer, let's call it a metaverse or not, or whatever it's going to be called eventually, right? Maybe Apple needs to come and give it a name. That layer, right? That we're this augmented layer. How do you see that connect with what you just called mimetic engineering or like idea engineering? I would call it archetypal engineering or something like. How does that
So
connect?
the main way that we transmit memes to each other today is through our language,
Okay.
right? So the main way that we transmit any kind of information to each other is through spoken or written language, and our language has severe limitations. Forget which philosopher, if it was Russell or Wittgenstein, that said, if you had the perfect language, you wouldn't need philosophy, right? We don't have a perfect language, but we're striving for a better language always. Language keeps evolving, and I, as I said, earlier in this conversation, I believe that ultimately augmented reality is a, a continuation of the evolution of language, and it's going to help us communicate better and tell richer stories and share more about the world. Just like you want to be able to say that this is a couch, or that this is beautiful, or that someone is exhibiting Schadenfreude, or we have words for all kinds of things.
But is that
right?
language a pictorial language like the hieroglyphs or like is it like is it a picture or like the Chinese symbol writing symbols in some ways too, like they're depicting pictograms, right? They're more like pictures of what they're talking about. Is this AR language more of a picture language instead of a
When
word language or?
it's where language, it allows you to answer where things are. You can show it in AR. Where are things, right? Like today, trying to communicate where something is, in English is not an easy task, right? That's not one of our most efficient modes of communication. When you have to start saying like, well, it's 10 centimeters to the right, which is not a very precise direction, of the candle. And we have so little power to communicate ideas today through our language. But when we can start expressing ourselves visually, and when we can start expressing ourselves spatially, I think it's possible to create so many new kinds of ideas even that we can't even meaningfully discuss in English on a podcast. I would
Sure.
have to show you in AR.
Sure. Now we're on the limitations of kind of what we can explore and reflect on, but we can reflect on, on the unspeakable. We can try that, always. Again, that's what philosophers or poets or artists have always to try to kind of express the unexpressible, right? But how do you, can you give me a couple of examples, like some concrete examples, like, I want to kind of, we've had a very philosophical discussion, which is great. I love that. But also let's do some kind of concrete use case kind of stuff. Like,
Sure. So let's talk
yeah.
about like what Matterless is doing,
Okay.
right? So Matterless is our sister company, daughter company. I don't know what the preferred language is.
So Auki
that is
Labs is the parent company of Matterless.
Yes.
Right. Okay.
And Matterless is building Matterless toys and Matterless companions, objects that we can relate to. that are real but matterless. And the first product that we started building was this Matterless pets idea, where we would allow people to have, we can start with a simple idea, a Tamagotchi that you can see physically in space, but also show effortlessly physically in space, so that your virtual pet really is there, intersubjectively there. And your pet and another person's pet can play with each other. And these pets can react to things in your environment and actually give you a bit intersubjectivity, be able to do things like dance to the music you're listening to, something that helps you feel sane, grounded, and calm, an actual companion. We realize that the power of making, of having AR is not to make some cool game. It's that, hey, when we can create something that really feels like it's there, what can we do with that? Well, we can create an actual companion, right? We can make something that feels safe psychologically, that feels present psychologically, and something that will give you a more meaningful outlet for your human impulse to love something. Like we like watering plants for why? Why do we like doing that? Because, the big thing that's missing from Maslow's hierarchy of needs is that we want to love things.
So, and we could love artificial kind of creatures or artificial, what is that actually? Projected creatures, right? Like
we love memes all the time, actually. We love fictitious characters. We love religious symbols. We love influencers we're never going to talk to. We have parasocial relationships. In fact, are you familiar with the company OnlyFans?
Yeah.
Right? So what is OnlyFans? What is their business model? What would you say OnlyFans business model is?
I don't know. I haven't used it much, so I have no personal experience with it. I know that it exists, and I know that people are making a lot of money on it by exposing their bodies and so on. But
yeah, so on the surface, right, it's a pornography site.
Yeah.
Right. On its surface, it's like, oh, here's a way for people to pay porn stars directly. Why would they do that? Is it because it creates better adult entertainment? No, it's not better porn. It's not cheaper porn. So what is it? Well, the thing that Twitch realized and that OnlyFans realized is the ability to interact directly, even if it's one-sided with the creator, creates this kind of parasocial reaction, right?
Right.
OnlyFans is parasocial interaction as a service, right? That's what it is. It's not adult entertainment. It's companionship.
Right,
It's
because you have
one-sided.
some level of interaction there with the person, with the content creator.
You get to be in a state of mind where you feel like you are with this person because you're doing a direct interaction with them. So even though that's not true, it still feels nice.
Okay, so let's get back to the use cases. So you said the projected creature, let's say that we could call that, enhancements of our environments through objects, through beings, through entities, and so on and so forth, and which could not just be like the Pokemon Go and so on, which only I see if I'm running around with my phone, but rather they could be shared now, right? Because they're shared, they become part of a shared reality. They become part of they become more real. They actually become real, right? As opposed to being
they become a part of reality. Again, reality is that which is intersubjective.
Yeah, which we can all agree on that's there, right? So okay, that's a use case, and we could imagine a world where not very far from us potentially, like this is, I don't want to give like timelines, but this could be, this coming decade could very well see a lot of this stuff come into being, right? And it's very likely
we have an early playable beta of this Matterless pet now. Like this is technology that's being built now.
Yeah,
I'm not here selling
like
anyone an NFT today to tell them
course,
I'm going to build something tomorrow. Like you can see this tech in action today. You can see it.
No, it exists, but I mean to the extent where like it will become like mass adopted and people will like it will start to really change the world, decade. Right? This decade is where it can happen and will happen potentially.
Yeah, the 20s is the decade that AR takes off. I genuinely believe that.
Yeah. And all of it's crazy. Like really, the 20s is the decade when the converging tech stack comes together to create a new world, right? Like after the like when you look at the 21st century, the first 2 decades, they still pretty much look like the 20th century. Like people look like they have phones in their hand, but they still look more or less like they used to look in the 90s or 80s or whatever, right? But from this decade onward, like, okay, we're creating a completely new world. But so that's one, like, this projections of enhancing our environments. What else is there in terms of use cases? Can you give me more concrete stuff? Like which industries can benefit? How can people benefit? Like what's use cases that entrepreneurs can explore?
Well, I mean, we explored how to save 20 million hours a day in Beijing. So, that was one thing. But indoor positioning in general today already is a $20 billion industry. Indoor positioning today is done with all kinds of very ingenious but also quite imprecise methods where typically you can only get about half a meter of precision indoors, which is great for a lot of things, but it's not going to allow you to have shared AR or to leave the kind of annotations where you can know exactly where you left an item or something like this, right? So indoor positioning, shared AR apps, as we spoke about, drone delivery. If you ever want to live in a world where a drone can go and deliver a cup of coffee that you ordered on Uber Eats or whatever, and have it delivered to your windowsill instead of your street address, this needs to be built, right? As soon as you kind of start wrestling with the concept that position is not something that exists today, it has to be built, then you realize that all the cool sci-fi things that we read about when we were kids and stuff, they're not going to happen until we solve the positioning problem.
Right. So so it will allow us, obviously. Okay, so there's those kind of logistics cases that you just mentioned, which is obviously huge. Kind of, I wouldn't even be able to estimate the size of that kind of disruption or that industry, right? Like to change logistics towards being precise with regards to positions. But then, okay, and then there is that's the use cases that we have. Those seem to be quite different use cases, right? Like the projections, that metaverse kind of, right? The augmented metaverse, that the layer of projections that we can lay on top of reality.
I think we're going to project everything soon, actually. If we're just going to talk, some financial forces here, the biggest battery drain on your phone today is its display. And the display is also its most limiting factor. The display is not very big, right? But if you instead had a pair of AR glasses that could precisely position things, if it had that ability, then you can replace this display, and you can replace your computer display, and you can replace your TV, and every digital display actually becomes replaceable.
And all information, all kind of interfaces. Yeah.
And there are very strong incentives for people to do this quite early. In fact, for a personalized ad, you get around 20 times as much as a non-personalized ad. And think of all the digital displays and print ads that are out in the physical world today that are showing non-personalized ad.
Right.
Since you get 20 times more for a personalized ad, that means we only need 5% of the population in a city like New York to be wearing interoperable AR glasses before the advertising industry just switches and focuses on that, right? This decade or next, the digital display industry will die, go the way of the fax machine. And sure, people still make fax machines, but no one uses them. I genuinely believe that by the year 2035, no one will buy TVs anymore, right? So the way that we interact with computers is about to fundamentally change, because today in our consciousness, computers are displays. They have displays.
Absolutely. Yeah. So like, that's obviously like the big kind of evolution of the internet and of the web of connectivity and information that we have, which currently we're accessing through these bricks, really, like, that are a drain on, if I'm, you're absolutely right. I think like when people look back 10, 20 years from now, they will be surprised that we were carrying these little bricks with ourselves all the time, right? Being somehow glued to this little object, right? It seems kind of not necessarily the most efficient way to access
standing
information.
Like this everywhere. Right?
Yeah. Like it's almost like it's kind of it looks unnatural, right? It's like, instead we can have this information and the content and the interfaces projected around us, right? And engage with it like freely, have our hands free, have our, be free to engage with things with voice, with gesture, with other types of input and command, right? And just interact with all of those interfaces. So, I mean, that obviously will create a completely completely different world, right? Like the world will look and feel vastly different. Is that already for you like a step in toward the transhuman? Is that what you would already call like, okay, this is already beyond what's human, or where do you see that?
I think it's an interesting step in the right direction, absolutely. But ultimately, the transhuman goal, the transhumanist goal that I want to reach, is a point where we start realizing that we are not our genes, we are our memes, right? The information that we create, that we curate, that we spread, this is what defines not only our civilization, but ourselves. And that it is desirable to not only transcend our biological bodies physically, which, you know, transhumanists have been talking about for a long time, but to transcend the biological body spiritually as well, and realize that we are the information that we have made. That's where all the love is stored. You know, here's a one-liner to explain why like memetics is important. 1,000 years from now, your descendants will not share any genes with you. You can't have a descendant of an alien species, but you could, in theory, write a song that was sung by an alien species. Memes can travel the universe in a way that genes just cannot, right? You can create an idea, you can write a poem, you can create a song, you can invent a piece of fashion that is universally applicable to every other thinking mind out there.
Interesting. Yeah, this is very interesting. You just give a new twist to that kind of philosophical perspective, which is like a Platonist philosophical perspective, that, you know, art and love and like the highest outputs of ideas that we have are timeless and they're beyond, you know, the ephemeral material realm, right? And you just put that into like you gave that a really nice twist from in a perspective of you know, contemporary information science, you know, science, basically, to, you know, to give that perspective. It's really great. It's really nice. I love that. So that's a great view. But so let's get back to the, okay, how do we transcend the human? And okay, we're speaking about this shift in the next 10 years or whatever it is, when we're going to be surrounded by kind of augmented worlds, right? The metaverse will become a thing, right? And we will augment our environments. And but also obviously there's the other tendency of the virtual, completely separate virtual worlds, where people will just plug into these pockets of alternate universes, right? That they will go into, and they will live their own different lives in those universes, right? And you say something that, you know, I like, but it's very philosophically very interesting to unpack that, or like talk about that more. And you say that the augmented reality is preferable because people want to engage with reality, right? More so than being, you know, in those alternate, completely virtual realities, right? But then the question is, what is actually real? Like, how do you explain that? Why is the being in a virtual reality not as good, or not as fulfilling, or not as real as being in our reality, like in your mind?
So I am not knocking the realness of virtual reality or virtual experiences in any way. You know, I'm gonna really bite the bullet and say that real is that which is intersubjective, right? And of course, we can have an intersubjective experience in VR. So I'm not gonna knock VR, right? But I also understand that today I am still unfortunately tethered to this body. Right? So today, unfortunately, I still have to go to the grocery store. And today, unfortunately, every now and then I have to go pee, right? And every time I do that, you know, that is a context switch, which reminds me that the thing that I'm in is different, right? It's a different place. And as I said, the metaverse needs to be a place of mind that you really inhabit. And I'm not sure that you can really feel that the place where you go pee is not the most real place. I don't know if we can get past that, right? So until someone solves that problem for me, chances are, as much as I appreciate virtual worlds and think they're amazing, they're never really going to be home the same way the real world is. You know, in a way, I think that a chat room where I'm sitting just typing in the real world is more metaverse than jumping into some VR headset that I have to take off because I have to go pee, because, you know, you shouldn't admit this, but I'm sure everyone does it. Everyone takes their device with them to the bathroom anyhow. Like, you don't have to stop, right? You're always connected to the internet. The internet is amazing that way, but you're not always connected to VR, and that's a bit of a bummer.
Well, I mean, that could be technologically solved, right? That could be changed. It's just like there is this whole, in the Matrix, the first in the trilogy, right? There is this guy called Cypher, who kind of, he was the traitor. He's like the Judas figure. He gives up on Neo and the others and so on, and he says that, I'm fine with what these machines are offering me. I know somewhere deep down that it's not real, but you know what? It's 99.99999 whatever percent real, right? For my brain cannot tell the difference, right? Like I'm getting in that artificial world that they're created. I'm getting everything I want. They're making me a celebrity and this, whatever he wants, right? And the steak tastes really good and so on, and that's why he chooses to be there. Now, this is really kind of interesting question, because as these devices get better and better, imagine like if we had a device where the fidelity is so high that you can't really tell the difference, right? Your brain can hardly tell the difference. We could get there with haptics and with, the resolution getting better and better all the time. Right?
Direct neural interfaces.
So yeah. Then what? How do we still even distinguish from this reality and that reality?
I think we can have the conversation again, of course, when there is a direct neural interface and you can put me in a tank where I never have to disconnect, and I don't have to worry about my natural, peeing and pooping and all of this stuff. Of course, we can have the conversation about virtual reality again then, yeah. But that's not where we are now. Yeah. I don't think we're quite ready we don't have the means to fully escape our biological bodies yet. Right? I'm not saying it will never happen. One day we, maybe even hopefully we'll be able to transcend our biological bodies, but that's not what's happening this decade.
Right. So, but you mentioned direct neural interfaces, and I saw something there. Like you said that I think somewhere you said that you did some work with a monkey that you connected their brain.
Yeah. So I was very fortunate to be part. Played a small administrative part together with my former business partner, working on a neural interface together with Arizona State University and Dr. Stephen Tillery and the Sensory Motor Research Group that wanted to study the plasticity of the human brain's ability to learn, or rather the primate brain's ability to be able to learn to use an entirely new limb. Great. So what does that mean? When you and I use a computer, we're actually using our arms. Right? We're actually using our fingers. Sure, we're remapping them to move them around in a different dimension, and it's cool that the brain can do that. But what if I gave you a third arm, right? Or a completely a prehensile tail? Can the primate brain learn to use something that it's never had before? Right? That's the question. So how do you study something like that? Well, the way you study something like that is you make a 3D game and you make a monkey play it with its thoughts. Okay, what does that mean? Well, if the monkey can play it with its thoughts and sit absolutely still, right, then maybe we've learned something. So let's walk through the steps here. What are we going to do? We are going to explain to the monkey how to play the game. And that turned out to be difficult because most monkeys don't speak English, right? So the way you explain to the monkey how the game works, we invented a very simple
reinforcement game.
You
give them something bananas if they do well.
So we have a very simple game. It's a room, and in one of the corners of the room will appear a colored ball. And in the middle of the room will be a differently colored ball. And then we will give the monkey a straw that can dispense juice. Right? And now we make it watch the movie. And every time the balls collide, it gets juice. Right? And we do that for a while. Cool. But of course, we also, let's see if we get this in the right order. We also want to start studying what happens when the monkey doesn't get what it wants. Right? So we start introducing errors in the video. Sometimes the ball goes the wrong way, and then we record what does it look like when the monkey thinks, oh no, go that way instead, right? We record that signal. And to be able to record that signal, right? Okay, then we need to make sure we have a clean signal. We need to know that we're looking for exactly what we want. So we need to make sure that the monkey sits absolutely still while we record it. All right, so immediately you think, okay, duct tape, right? Not going to work, because if the monkey is thinking about moving, right? If the monkey is thinking about moving, we're getting a bad signal. So now we have to solve the problem. How do we teach the monkey to sit still? We make the monkey put its hands on two buttons in front of it, and only when it presses the buttons does the movie play. Right? So now it's sitting, pressing the buttons, watching the movie. We introduce the errors that sometimes the ball goes the wrong way. That's step 3, right? So first, make it watch the movie sitting still, introduce errors, record what the errors look like, and then finally map the controls of the game to the signature of that thought, right? So we build up a model of what it looked like when the monkey thought what we think is, oh no, go left, right? We record that signal and we map that to the controls of the game. And we plug it in. And we see if the monkey manages to make the ball go left when it wants it to go left. And the answer is yes. The monkey can learn to control the ball with its thoughts by thinking, I want the ball to go over there. Not, I want to use my arm to make the ball go over there. So that's pretty cool. As far as I know, that team and that project was the first project to demonstrate that a primate brain has the ability to learn something like that.
It was in the news. It was like a thing like years ago. But obviously it's still okay. That's still like the very early days of being able to map some kind of correlations and use them or functionally. But now we're talking about, Neuralink is actually doing human trials this year with and there's going to be a commercial grade kind of device implant pretty soon, right? And there's other companies that are advancing as well, in that area, with some with intrusive with implants, others with like external devices that are more like, these kind of Muse headbands and so on, but much more advanced, obviously. And how do you see that if that field advances in the next few years exponentially, right? Then how do you see that connect and interact with AR and spatial computing?
Well, it can give us more ways to interact with the virtual world. It can give us more efficient inputs that don't involve, our physical body. Because the unfortunate thing about our physical body is it doesn't exist in the virtual world, right? The reason you can't, see a virtual beach ball and swat it away with your hand today is your hand doesn't exist in the virtual world that the ball exists in. Just because you've put the virtual world in the real world does not mean you've put the real world in the virtual world, right? Does that make sense? Right? So, and you might think like, oh, but there's hand detection already, right? Yeah, but is there? The way that hand detection works on a phone today is it maps in 2D space, on the display where the hand is, because a camera does not have depth perception. So it doesn't know how big your hand is. It doesn't know if it's a huge ass hand over there, or if it's a tiny ass hand here, right? And that means that with normal hand detection, you can't actually touch an object in AR. Like now VR headsets, some fancy VR headsets, I forget which ones, they can do hand reconstruction. But the reason they can do hand reconstruction is because they have sets of sensors that, your phone doesn't really come with. And it also always sees your hands while they're in front of you, whereas, your camera might not always do that, right? So one of the big drawbacks in the current era of technology and the handheld form factor, but even in the wearable and maybe or in the early versions of neural interface, is that your body does not exist in the virtual world. But if you can put sensory motor or motor input into the virtual world and control things in the virtual world, that could be really, really meaningful. What shape these kinds of neural interfaces will take, it depends. There's only so much information you can get, with an external sensor through the skull, because you don't get, a great signal. And even if we could connect directly to the brain, no one really knows how much information you can get out of that. So
Yeah.
There's an engineering challenge, not just in how much information can we get out of the brain, or can we write anything at all, right? But we don't know of any API in the brain that we can query. Does that make sense? We don't have an interoperable protocol with the brain, and we don't know that it's possible to build an interoperable.
We don't know the translation mechanism, the interface. Like we don't know how to really kind of even to how to kind of convert information that we have in the form of semantic information, categories, whatever, semantic AIs and so on, how to convert that into thoughts that are happening inside neural structures in the brain, right? We don't know yet what that conversion looks like. So, but I mean, this is, I think it would be very reasonable to assume that in 2, 3, 4 years, we will know,
Well, here's a very cool neural interface that you can do with very little information from the brain, right? You can take a mouse cursor, right? And you can plot it out on the 2D area of the world you're in, right? Like a display. And you can maybe move it in 4 directions. The monkey in our experiment really did it in 3 directions, which is pretty cool. But, let's start with at least 2 directions. If we, or, 2 dimensions, if we can get 2 dimensions, but also enough of intent so you can do something like a click. Now, all of a sudden, you can interact with things that you see in your AR field of view without moving your body around and, doing weird things like this. And it's a little bit privacy preserving, actually. And that might be quite possible to get actually just through, the sight of a pair of sufficiently advanced AR goggles. I don't think the tech is miniaturized enough yet now, but, it's feasible that it could be. And that doesn't require, if you could get those sensors small enough, you can certainly do it with big sensors, right? But if you could get the sensor small enough, then you wouldn't even need surgery. And I think that's more consumer friendly, right, for sure.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's just one more field where entrepreneurs and researchers and scientists and people who are going to explore and explorers, there's so much for people to explore right now and to try out, right? It's incredible. Like it's an infinite almost domain of possibilities there. But yeah, I'm happy that we talked about a lot of things. We went through a lot of kind of a great kind of cut through some of the most important themes and topics that I think exist right now for that human technology evolution. And in the beginning, we mentioned a little bit the dangers as well, or what could, where things could go wrong, right? And yeah, I'd like to kind of bring that back at the end of kind of like an arc. It's like, if you had to do, or if you were asked to have a message to humanity, which could be a cautionary but also an encouraging one, in what would that be? Like, what would you want humanity to pay attention to more or heed more?
My personal life motto is spread good memes, not turn the other cheek or do unto others. It's specifically spread good memes, because I believe it teaches us to be mindful not just of our actions, but the kind of actions that our actions give birth to, not just our words, but the kind of words that our words give birth to. And if we really are mimetic beings, if our culture really just is the sum of our information, you should be mindful that the information you put out in the world is good.
That's powerful. So like not just to pay attention to like something that's quite immaterial, right? Like the memes that we put out, the information that we put out. But you're saying, and when I bring that back to what you said before, actually that the information that we create and put out can even survive us in a way that even our genetics or our material probably can't even, right? Like that just kind of emphasizes again how important that layer is. I mean, for me, that layer is consciousness, but I think maybe we're just like different, using different terms to refer to something very, very similar, you know, and very, very kind of, you know, connected. So yeah, man, this is amazing. I think this conversation was so cool. I'm so glad to have had you on here, Nils, for one of our first, you know, new format Ultrasync episodes. And I really look forward to see what you're going to be doing with Auki Labs and how the whole field will evolve. You know, I wish you guys like the best of success with your work that you're doing yourself, as well with your perspective and your approach that you have. Again, I would just like recommend everybody who's listening or watching to go check out your work and your writings, and I'm going to link everything obviously below everywhere, you know, that people can, if people want to find something. And yeah, maybe, you know, who knows, maybe in some time when Ultrasync is expanding more, we can continue this conversation.
That would be amazing, and I hope one day to have the opportunity to sit by you, next to you at a bonfire as well, so we can have a human moment.
That sounds beautiful, man. Appreciate that. Great, beautiful. Okay, I thank you so much for this conversation, Nils.
Thank you. This has been really, really precious.
Awesome, man. All the best to you, and everybody sync up yourself, man. You got it. Ultrasync. Let's go.